Okay, as I started thinking about EMI and what it is, I guess I just boiled it down to taking your data and getting it into a usable format. But what techie wouldn't use a sexy acronym if there's one handy? So hence we have EMI. I just want to show you a reference to who I'll be talking about today, the players in this little saga that we went through. I'm part of a large food company, ConAgra Foods. Weston is a division in the Intermountain Northwest that is primarily dedicated to making French fries. The tools that we selected that we will be talking about primarily is Rockwell Automation's Vantage Point software, and we partnered with Stone Technologies, a solutions and integration provider. So I guess the primary question is, how do we get our arms around the manufacturing process, the data that comes out of your manufacturing process, and bring it into a real-time format and make it useful? So that's going to be the crux of what we talk about today, and I'm going to touch on four things. Give you the problem or situation that we faced, and I would follow Lloyd's comments that I've sat through a lot of really good presentations the last couple of days that talk about this subject. Arriving at a solution, how did we get there? What were the results of it? And I think one of the more important points is to circle back and try to understand what the lessons learned were after we finished our first go-round. And I would point out that in no way do we think we're finished with this. We just started this process, and I think we're just partway through it. Well, this will come as no shock to anybody sitting out there. I know competition isn't anything new, and everybody needs an edge, no matter how slight or how you get it. This is a common theme this week. We have drive after drive, terabytes of data spinning on our file servers, and are we really getting a value out of it? I guess I'm real sensitive to this issue because I grew up in the IT organization and kind of made the transition over into process control. Those are two disciplines that are very blurry, and the IT people, I'm finding, they want to help. They want to help us get where we want to be, but sometimes they just lack an understanding and vision of what to do with all that data. So they go about their business of trying to keep the data safe and backed up. We had daily reports that weren't immediate enough to give us any real value. We created, in many of our plants, we created daily report, but it comes out after the fact. And this report is telling supervisory and executive layers what just happened in their plant the day before. So it made us very reactionary. And I would probably guess that many of the businesses that you represent have the same issues. You've got data scattered hither and thither, and people have a real problem trying to make sense of it. I guess one of the big takeaway points that I would point out here is that management oftentimes doesn't understand what they don't know. And that sounds really simple, but don't underestimate the value of that concept. When we first broke into this process, it came slamming home to us halfway through that we really didn't know up front what we were trying to get on the back end. This is just a couple of examples of plant floor controls. This is just a HMI screen taken off of one of our pack floors, and it shows the operator. You know, the green says everything's running. It shows them little data points here and there that are pertinent to the operation of the line. This is a fairly busy one that controls some sorting systems. And they may even have access to some graphs and charts on the plant floor, tools that they use to allow them to better run their lines. So what you have happening is in this PLC, I'll call it the PLC and control space, you have massive amounts of data that are being passed back and forth either for control or your SCADA system is probably gathering data. And I know in many years of experience that I've had with SCADA systems, we've had a lot of different flavors of historical databases, and rarely do I find that we do a really, really good job of mining that data in a timely manner and in a useful manner to those making decisions on the plant floor. So if you look at the traditional reporting model, again, I am guessing that this is fairly common around the industry, that you look across the bottom and the left-hand side, you have the PLC and control layer, your PLC and SCADA systems, and then you go into your lab data, your SPC data, maybe you even have an advanced SPC reporting package, your bill of materials, and maybe systems that are reporting on your energy. And in this reporting model, what we typically do is each one of those disparate applications will roll data from that application up to a report. You probably have manifest reports, some kind of production report, maybe a waste report, quality reports. You get the flow of how this happens. You've probably seen it in your own organization. And so people are asked to be made aware of things that are happening on a production floor by going and grabbing the right report. And what I find that many times happens is that people are spinning this out on their own. And depending on how good they are with the tools, you'll have somebody that's an Excel expert, and he'll spin that out to Excel, and he'll add some production, some manifest stuff, some loss reports, and then voila, he's got what he needs. So much the same as you heard earlier when Lloyd was talking, we had the same issue that we wanted to get through, so we sat down and talked about arriving at a solution, and that was one of the reasons why we partnered with somebody like Stone Technologies. They're a player that is very well versed in this. They have a very good reputation in the industry, and they've done a lot of this type of reporting. And the longer I'm working in this business, the more I see that you really need to partner yourself, line up alongside of people who are very good in that workspace, and that's all they do. I don't have to build my own reporting expert in my own organization. So the first thing is to articulate what you think you need in reporting, and you might not know when you start out. That's okay. It's likely going to be an evolutionary process. Your idea may differ very wildly from what your plant executive level or your organization's executive level thinks they need. This lesson came crashing home when we turned our integrator loose to do reports. We had put them together kind of in a vacuum and thought we understood what they needed, and they looked at it and said, well, what's this? This isn't what I wanted. And so we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and start over and change a lot of the reports and create a lot of new ones. You have to ask yourself if you have a mechanism for collecting the data that you're after. One of the things that we're going through enterprise-wide is sort of a mission, if you will, to go out and try to collect count data off of packaging machines primarily, and try to get a feel for how we're utilizing our assets. One of the things you may want to do is sit down and diagram the data that you have and where you think the gaps are. And if you don't understand all of it up front, that's fine. It's a process. There are a lot of tools, so you need to pick one that fits your needs. And I guess the takeaway here would be let the needs define what you select. Don't let the delivery mechanism define that. You need to understand what you want and then go after a delivery mechanism to get that. That's why sometimes when you look for canned packages, you come away a little bit disheartened because they may do 90% of what you want, but not everything. It's important to allow the organization to affect real change. And what I mean by that, I'll talk about a little bit later, is you really need to get the buy-in from the correct people up front, or it's just going to fall flat on its face. And then you're probably going to want to focus on KPIs. Not trying to, or I wouldn't try to presume knowledge of what you need in your particular organizations, but my guess is there are key KPIs that you care about. Some of the ones, this may be a good place to start. Look at production, maybe a pounds per hour. That's the way we look at it. We look at it as a pounds per hour actual versus budget. Losses or waste, what are those factors? Quality, those are pretty easily defined because you have standards and you have probably lab data that you're collecting and comparing against those standards. Energy, how much does it cost per pound? That's what we look at. And I worked at a plant where one of my duties was to prepare a budget for the fuel, power, and water. Those are three big usages for our organization. And I found out really quickly that I needed to focus on usage rather than price, because the price is something that you can't do anything about. And one of the comments one of the managers made to me was, we can sit on the street corner and bawl about the price of natural gas, or we can figure out how we can use fewer decatherms in our plants. So that's really where the focus should be. So knowledge in the KPI data is probably somewhere where you'd want to start. And again, looking back at the previous presentation, he used the analogy of fishing, and I would say that is where you're trying to find out where the fishes are so that you'll know where to drop your hook. So the situation that we got into, we had a historian. We have a lot of custom in-house developed applications. In most cases are SQL databases. And quality, manifest, bill of materials, these are all things that through the years we had developed. And if you try to look at trying to replace those, that's just a gargantuan task, and nobody's going to support that. So we have to go back around and say, all right, we're dealt the cards we're dealt with. I guess we better figure out a way that we can bring all of that data together. We've been looking at this. In my career, I've been looking at it for a long time. I don't know if any of you remember a product called Lighthammer. That was kind of an attempt to do this, and I'm not really sure why we didn't execute on that very well. I think the technology, the wishes and the needs probably outran what the technology was able to do at the time. So we tried to settle on a dashboard concept. All right, we're going to bring all of this data together and try to make it transparent to the user where it came from. They shouldn't care. It shouldn't bother them at all that you went through a bunch of magic to get the data to them. So what I would point out here is that this is the same data structure model, but now we're trying to bring it up into summary dashboards instead of the production people and even the plant floor people and the executive layer trying to make sense of these different reports. We wanted to bring everything together in one place and show them so that they could see what the impact of an increased production was. Maybe that meant that there was more waste than they wanted or more bulked off product, whatever it is. We wanted to show it together so that they would try to get more of an entire picture of it. This is just an example of an OEE screen. That's all the rage right now, but it is very real and very timely to be thinking about that. A little anecdote that I would share is when I worked in a plant, we had a very high producing line that I would often hear the operators complaining that we just don't have enough baggers, enough bag filling machines. And so as industrial engineers, a couple of us went down and used a calculator to prove to them that if those baggers ran at 80 to 85% efficiency, and they all ran, they could far outproduce what that line was capable of dishing to them. And they'd scratch their heads and say, well, that's wrong. And then we sat back and watched them, and what was happening was, even though the pounds necessary weren't coming to them to turn the bagger up to its maximum level, that's what they were doing. And so they would jam all the equipment downstream of it, and their reaction was, I'm not keeping up, so turn them up some more. And we beat our heads against the wall trying to prove to them, if you'll just turn them down and slow down, you'll run faster. This is, you can't see it very well, I don't think, but we're very tuned to energy and pounds produced and the cost of all the energy stuff. We look at it even as a kilowatt hours per pound and water usage per pound. And so we tried to lay this all out on one report so that management could see where they were. And they have budgeted numbers, and they look at the actual numbers and say, does that match budget? We call yields recovery in our business. It's the same thing, but anyway, it's just a function of how much are you getting out of what you put in the front end. And we were trying to show that, again, against budget, trying to show it even on a shift-by-shift basis, which was very new to our group. They were used to seeing it a day later or even maybe a week or a month later, what their cumulative yields were. And then we tried to show them an executive summary. They had a daily report they were putting together, and somebody was going out and taking all of this data from these different databases. You have production data and QA data and even some safety information that somebody was taking and spending hours crunching and to give to the executive, the managers in the plant. And here again, they were just getting it too late for it to be of any real value for them to make decisions on a problem that happened yesterday. So what were the results? And I think the question on everybody's lips are, what did you save dollar-wise? And I'll just throw out that I don't know. It's really hard to put dollars on something like this. And that makes it really tough to get a project written up and get the right signatures on it. I understand that. But I'll answer that question of what we saved with some more questions. And this is kind of the way I've tried to attack these kinds of projects within the organization. And the first thing is to ask, what does better information and more timely knowledge mean to you? Well, it would help me run my line better. No, what does it mean to you? What would it mean? Does it mean that you can run it better, meaning more pounds? Does it mean that you can produce less waste? Does it mean that you can keep your arms around your water usage better if you see it by hour, even by minute, how much you're using? What does it mean to you? Can someone with a vision step up and champion this project? What we had to do in the Greenfield plant project, there was nothing to be saved because we were building a new plant. So what happened there is we just had to have somebody stand up and champion that and say, okay, I'm involved in this project. I'm willing to stick my neck out and say that this is worth spending the money on to put this kind of a reporting solution in. And you may need somebody to just step up and frankly take a leap of faith. That's sometimes what it means. You just have to put your neck out and say, I am willing as a production manager to give up 0.4% of yield and claim that because I know that running my plant better and having this information at my fingertips is going to make me better. And sometimes you have to do that. I know how it is to try to get signatures on a capital request that doesn't have a savings. So I'd like to spend just a minute and talk a little bit about the project methodology. So how do you get there from here? If you look at the different phases there, the first is to, of course, define what you want to do. So you got to come up with a strategy and a preliminary design, and then you need that to roll into designing a solution, applying a solution to that. And I think in phase one, you need to have your partner, your integrator, whoever you're going to use, they need to be there with you at that time. They need to be part of that process because they're probably going to bring some learnings and some expertise that you don't have. Why else would you have hired them? And then the deployment phase would say that you're going to start up and commission and maintain and support. So there's care and feeding that goes into this after you've paid for the solution. A key takeaway on this slide is to not underestimate or shortchange the first phase, the definition phase. I did that on the project at our Greenfield plant, and I paid dearly for it later on. Kind of one of the mantras I live by in anything like this that we're doing, any kind of production system or PLC system, is a dollar spent up front is about $5 on the back end. And it's probably more than that. In real dollars and pain, if you spend the upfront money planning it, you are going to reap the rewards later. So what were our lessons learned? I think this is one of the more important parts of trying to analyze how we arrived at this solution. And I would like to point out, we're not all the way there. I feel like we stepped up and probably hit a double. Hoping that on our next project, we've just announced a brand new plant in Eastern Oregon. I hope we hit it out of the park on that one. I'm bound and determined that we take our learnings from what we did in Louisiana and we bring it over to Eastern Oregon and make it that much better. It's okay up front to not know what you need. As I mentioned before, it's an evolutionary process, and it's going to take some work to get through and try and figure out just where you need to apply the development. One of the things that will really help you in figuring this out is to do report mock-ups. And I mean literally get Visio or Excel or something and just dumb up some reports, put some fictitious data on them, put some boxes with graphs on them with fictitious data. That goes a long ways into having a manager or supervisor come back and say, that's not really what I had in mind. Because if you I found if I sat down with the management group and asked them what they wanted, I got a 1,000-mile stare. They didn't really know. Management and stakeholder buy-in up front is absolutely critical. I talked to a lady from one of the large paper companies that manages a plant, and she had the same integration company work with them on some stuff, and they had taken it a couple of steps further, and she showed me a bunch of the slides of the data they were gathering and how they were coalescing all this data into a dashboard, and they'd had some real success, and I had to ask her, how did you affect that success? Because we've had a couple of tries at this, and they were a swing and a miss. And, of course, one of the things was she was plant manager, so she was able to dictate what the employees did. But one of the things that came out, the common theme in everything she said was she got buy-in from people all the way through the organization. Well, what about that guy on the plant floor that you are now asking to enter data on his machine stops? He didn't have to do that before. Now you gave him another task. And she said, well, what I did is I showed them that it had real value for them. They entered that data in, and without them calling and asking, somebody from maintenance showed up with a tool belt and fixed their bagger machine because they noticed in the data that bagger number 4 had 132 stops in the last 3 days. And so they could see a real value to what they were getting there. You need to sell the idea at all levels. Another thing that I found is that if you don't sell the plant manager on it, the production manager, the people that are really affecting the change in the plant, it's not going to go very far. If I go into a plant, I recently went into one of our plants where we're trying to talk about model predictive control and didn't get a real warm reception. So instead of trying to cram it down their throats, I've kind of stepped back and tried to take a little more of a salesman-like approach to them to try to show them what the value is going to be. You need to allow the process to evolve. If you don't hit it out of the park the first time, that's okay. A new facility needs break-in time. This is another thing that we found out through hard lessons. And involve IT up front. Again, this is the old IT hat that I once wore. These guys really do want to help. I promise. They're not the enemy. They're not the dark side. They really do want to help, and they want to do well and provide help in getting these systems put in, and you have to have them. We had to have these guys write stored procedures to mine the data out of SQL, and they had to be on the same page that we were on. Detail early what data that you have available and what data would be nice to have. And don't get too hung up on what it's going to cost. I understand what it costs to put more sensors in the plant and put the I/O in your PLC cabinets and get the programmers to program it and the downtime you're going to need. I understand that. But you need to be able to quantify what that is. Is it worth doing or not? It becomes a choice if you at least know what it is and how much it's going to cost to do it. And again, I would reiterate the point that upfront planning time pays huge dividends later on in the process. Don't underestimate that. I'm going through that now with a big project and had to really do a sales job to try to convince engineering I needed to spend a lot of money up front on some pre-engineering. So that's my presentation for today. Thank you, and I hope that you'll have some questions for us.